Okay, so I'm here with Taylor. Taylor, this is pretty cool. This is an impromptu podcast. Didn't set this up in advance. Bumped into you in the player/talent green room, and give me an introduction of who you are and how you found yourself in this environment.
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for grabbing me and having me on the podcast. I'm excited to do it. So Taylor Johnson, I've been an athletic performance coach for about 10 years. Majority of my career was spent coaching in college. In the last 2 years, coaching the National Football League for the San Francisco 49ers. And then the last 2 years, I've been working in esports. And so for me, I've always told people that my passion is performance, but it's my curiosity that navigates me through the world. And so that's ultimately how I found myself within esports. So the last year when I was in the NFL coaching, I realized that the NFL was not the end-all be-all for me. I wanted to have a much larger impact, primarily promoting health and wellness to millions of kids worldwide. And I felt that in traditional sports, they've done a lot of things well, but there's also a lot of downfalls. And so I was looking for areas to pivot, and wanted to stay within performance, obviously. And a good friend of mine is a CEO of a tech company out in Toronto. And we were just talking shop one day, and he goes, "Hey, you should check out esports." I was like, that's interesting. I knew of it, but I didn't know how big it was or how big it's truly becoming. And started to unpack it just like I would any other traditional sport, and asking the questions I would of any other sport. How do you train? How do you recover? What's the overall structure and organization look like? And I realized very quickly that there's more similarities than differences, although the differences are quite large. And so the further down I went in the rabbit hole, I realized this is fascinating, and it got completely blown away, and started reaching out to other people in the space and kept the conversation going. And ultimately, in February of 2017, just went all in, and haven't looked back since. And so this past year, I was working for Infinite Esports Entertainment, coaching teams and organizations like Optic Gaming, Obey, Team Allegiance, and Optic LOL, and Houston Outlaws. And had a phenomenal time with them, and now I'm a free agent and just consulting in the space and really trying to optimize and view things through a different lens and build out a more comprehensive approach to overall esports performance.
So I guess we can go and start maybe with your time in Optic then. As an example, what were some of the, when you first walked into that job, what were some examples of, you looking at a situation and thinking, okay, this is where I can start. If we address things like this or create this approach, this is going to help this player or team. Where did it start with Optic?
I'll actually back up even further. So the first experience I had working with a team was overseas. It was for a Dota 2 team during a boot camp. And so they flew me out to Istanbul for 10 days. And, I've always been a fan of not doing too much too soon too often. And I really wanted to have it be organic in nature and really start a conversation, because you cannot force anything on anyone. It has to happen from really figuring out what is absolutely essential at that point in time. And everybody's different. Every team is different. And so from that experience, I realized very quickly that a lot of it comes down to structure, systems, and scheduling, which for a lot of people and a lot of organizations tends to be very difficult to do with everything that's going on around them. And when it comes down to performance, having those 3 S's, structure, systems, and scheduling, are the foundations and the bedrock of all things to come. So now fast forward and working with Optic, they hadn't done anything in terms of performance, at least to the extent that we were planning on doing. And so I knew that you can't fit a square peg in a round hole. You got to smooth out the edges, but there are some fundamental principles. And so for me, in taking a step back and looking at that, it was lifestyle, mindset, nutrition, movement, and recovery. So those became our 5 big pillars, and how we broke them down and really started in building out models that can then be built upon in layers moving forward. So working with the teams, we created time blocks. We built the facility, so they came in, had time blocks 2 to 3 times a week, and we treated them just like other traditional athletes, where they had an hour training session where you do your warm-up, mobility, movement, recovery. We shaped the environment to be conducive to a healthier lifestyle, where we had meal preps for them. We had proper nutrition and supplementation available, and the big thing is education. Starting off and having these conversations, I'd ask, what's been what are the factors that have kept you from really getting into health and wellness? And it was interesting. It came down to three things. It was a lack of knowledge, a lack of resources, and a lack of confidence. So I said, okay, let's build that. So we had a facility, and that was the resources, where we had, all the equipment you can imagine to really get a great training session in, but more importantly, give them tools and the understanding that they can get a great training session in outside of the facility itself. And then the lack of knowledge came with just education. So as a coach, there's an art and a science, and it's always about developing an education campaign or a model where you can slow drip that information and not have it go over their head. So we were very intentional in how we built out our programs so that whatever information we presented, it would stick, and then you just start building that over time. And so that's really where it started out. And then that expanded to building that entire Discord channel for them where they had information coming out every day. We have our Twitter channel. So I created Inside IPI on Twitter, which is everything around research, training, and recovery. And really just trying to promote that message, not only to the players themselves, but also to the broader audience.
So how does it translate to esports and esports players? Because obviously, like for example, when you're sort of mentioning your pillars, and movement is one of them. Someone might you might have a player that's thinking, why do I need to do this? Why do I need to exercise and so on and so forth? So obviously with an athlete, that's what they're already doing, and you can just optimize that. So there's some differences there. Did you run into people that were more resistant, and how did you overcome that, and what were the differences like?
Yeah, great question. There's always going to be some sort of pause when you're trying something different, and so the conversation I'd always have is, why do you do what you do? And a classic example or answer rather is, well, it's the way it's always been done. I'm like, great. Are you successful because of or in spite of everything you've done? Which is a very hard question to answer. But what that does is pique the curiosity enough to then follow with, are you willing to try something different? So again, it's all about the conversation. And while the movement may seem like it may not make sense for gamers, it's actually very beneficial. When you take a step back and you look at, okay, you're in seated positions for long periods of time, you can restrict blood flow. And the moneymaker for these professional gamers is going to be their cognitive output, and they'll be able to process information and react. And so with that, the movement was to facilitate a greater work capacity or cardiovascular effect so we can improve cognitive performance. And there's numerous literature out there and white papers that show that physical training can improve cognitive performance because the body and the mind are connected. And so once you start to have that conversation, and when you get individuals in the habit of being consistent with their training, you've probably experienced yourself because you're a fit guy. You tend to think more clearly. You can sustain your focus for longer. And it's just a matter of getting over that initial hurdle to then get past that point. You're like, wow, this is actually working pretty good. And then once you start tweaking the nutrition and you sleep better, that's a recipe for success.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think one thing I also found is just calmness. I think it sort of helped me to be, like any nervous energy, I think it had more of a physical outlet. The sleep is an interesting one. I think that actually, there's another topic I want to attack with you, because it came up earlier when we were talking. You already mentioned, you had a friend in Toronto. Is that the Halo neuroscience stuff? Or?
No, that's San Francisco.
Okay, that's okay. Yeah. So I guess firstly, one thing that may have escaped some people, there's been a lot of really amazing studies on sleep, and thanks to popular podcasters like Joe Rogan. I think his name is Christopher Walker. I think is a guy who.
So, yeah.
He wrote a lot of literature as one of the leading sort of scientists on sleep, and so there's more information out there. But still, a lot of people are sort of unaware that your practice really does take roots in all the repetitions that happen when you're asleep.
Yes.
So getting good quality sleep is one of the most. It's the easiest thing that is overlooked, and when you're younger as well, it's very difficult, I think, to have sort of the presence of mind and to feel like you need it because you're young and you're kind of invincible. It feels like you're invincible when you're young. So it's like now I feel like I'm fading away. If I don't hit the gym, I'm gonna like walk into another grave. It feels like, but so yeah. How do you attack this as well? Because it is. Like, how do you introduce these ideas to these professional players? Because from one perspective, too, if they got very good, and as you say, just by doing what they've been doing, I think it's difficult for them to see why that might be valuable. And I feel like learning is best done when someone's perceives something to be valuable. So, and sleep is presumably, if you understand what's happening, should be the most valuable thing, but it's still overlooked. So how do we change this culture, do you think, around this?
Yeah, great question. I mean, sleep's also the cheapest thing you can do too. I mean,
that's
that is your
point,
biggest bang for the buck is get more sleep. The second one, you know, no pun intended, the lowest hanging fruit is to eat better, because what you put in your body isn't going to fuel your body, but also help you recover and recharge. So that feeds into your sleep cycles as well. So the question around sleep is a great one. And again, in looking at the practice schedules, and, you know, when I was at the 49ers, I managed our sports science. And so I was looking at acute versus chronic loading. And we had a ton of different technology to track that. So I was looking at 7 and 21 day rolling averages, where we were capturing guys' sleep, whether it was subjective or if we had like a fatigue science ready band on them and tracking their sleep. And what you'd find is, you know, it may not be practice itself, but it's everything on the peripheral that feeds into their overall stress. And everything is stress. A fight with your girlfriend, traffic you drive in, the food you eat, the practice, a win or a loss, it's all stress regardless. Even training itself and recovery can be stressful. So taking that into consideration, it's this governing dynamic of load management. And so understanding that everything is stress, it needs to be optimized. And really, it's just a proportion of what comes throughout the day, the weeks, the months. And so by having a proper sleep protocol or understanding your circadian cycles, and let's say, you know, for you coming across the pond and having to adjust to that time zone, and that's very important, especially if your job is to speak and have, you know, mental clarity. And for these gamers coming across seas, and to be able to have a proper sleep protocol, to be able to play at their very best consistently, that is key. And so to really understand that, it's the individual at the basic level and saying, okay, well, what time are you getting to bed? What time are you waking up? And one of the more clear ways to capture that is with some sort of technology to understand what does that sleep cycle look like. So for me, like I'm wearing an Oura ring, and that's a wearable technology where it tracks my sleep, it tracks my movement, it's also my activity as well. It's kind of like a Fitbit, but I wear it on my ring because it measures my resting heart rate at night and HRV.
Very cool. So what's that called again?
Oura.
Oura. Okay, I haven't heard of
O-U-R-A.
that one.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
O-U-R-A.
I've been playing around with it for a couple months now, and I really enjoy it. I like that better than like the wristwatch.
Is that very new?
It's fairly new. This is the second generation ring.
Okay,
it's been around for a little while, but I mean, I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I like wearable tech.
Yeah, wearables are cool, man. It's like, so my buddy in Toronto, that's what he does. He does wearable tech. So kind of getting back to, you know, the question is, you know, once you understand, I mean, even if you don't have the tech, if you can subjectively track your sleep and your mood. So how many hours did you sleep? Do you feel well rested? And what's your mood? Just those three things, and start to be cognizant of that over time. You can kind of peek into that window of, okay, well, am I getting enough sleep? Because if I feel like I'm dragging, I need 5 cups of coffee or a couple of energy drinks just to feel normal, like we had this conversation earlier.
Yeah. If
you're already below baseline and you're needing supplementation to get you back to feeling okay, well, then you're obviously in a deficit. And sleep debt is a real thing. So being able to get yourself back up to baseline, so where you can wake up and feel energized, is the first thing. The second thing is then from there, it's maintaining consistency with the travel schedules, which could be quite tricky, especially for CSGO. I mean, they're all over the world. I mean, they're playing. Yeah. It's pretty wild, right? So nutrition and sleep schedules on the road, it becomes very important. But on the fundamental levels, it's just understanding, okay, how many hours of sleep do I really need? 5 to 6 is probably not enough. Well, even though some say like, hey, that's all I need. Well, they've probably never gotten consistent, like 8 hours of sleep consistently, because then they'd be like, wow, this is actually really what I need. But everybody's different. So 7 to 9 hours is probably ideal. Everyone's going to have a little bit of wiggle room with that. And once you maintain that for a certain period of time, then you can start adjusting, and you can have different interventions with nutrition. It's always interesting too, whether you have a problem falling asleep or staying asleep, because those are 2 separate issues. So addressing that maybe with some supplementation with melatonin or slow release melatonin. So melatonin by itself and L-theanine is great for falling asleep. Slow release melatonin will keep you asleep. So that's where you can kind of start dosing in the supplementation.
Right, and that's another interesting question, like having trouble falling asleep and circadian rhythm. I know that for gamers, one of the biggest things is, I mean for people in general, but specifically gamers as well, is looking at screens and all the blue light. And I think I've read that it can shift your circadian rhythm by like 1 to 3 hours. You can be like artificially jet lagging yourself. So I feel like that's also something to take into consideration. And again, I feel like with the younger players, you don't really feel it. You don't really have that sort of body awareness and sensitivity quite yet. And so it's harder to sort of nail down if you're getting bad quality sleep. And so do you have any tips behind the jet lag one though? Because that is as you I mean, you said it, like that is an undeniable part of the job for these players and for the talent as well, you know, flying around all over the place. So how do you what is your best chance basically to get the best quality sleep when you're jet lagged?
I'll first talk about the blue light, screen exposure, and then I'll kind of tie it into the jet lag. So the screen exposure, I mean, you can't really get away from it if you're a professional gamer or an amateur gamer aspiring to be a pro. But what you can do is be very diligent in your cutoff time of when you stop playing. And for many, that's hard, right?
Yeah.
It's like, say, hey, you know, cut it off an hour before you go to bed. For a lot, that's very challenging. So I say, hey, start with 15 minutes. You know, 15 minutes before bed, just shut it off. And what I find too is having some good breathing exercises as a tool to calm yourself down is very, very beneficial. And a lot of times, for myself in particular, I have a very active mind. So what I do at night is I journal. I write out, I just brain dump everything that's on my mind in that moment for, 5 to 10 minutes, and then that's it. I don't have to think about it because I wrote it down. I can come back to it tomorrow. Something I always do too is always write down things I'm grateful for, my lessons learned, because if you're not learning something every day, you're not paying attention. And what were the big wins? I think too often people don't acknowledge the things they're doing right. They tend to focus on the things they're doing wrong. And there's a balance between that. So that helps getting to sleep for a lot of people, actually. Now, the jet lag is always interesting. Whether you're going, crossing time zones forward or backwards, that's always going to play a role. We were talking about it earlier, but fasting on your long flights is a fantastic way to really sync up your sleep cycles with whatever time zone you're in. Another thing to start doing is adjusting your sleep, whether you go to bed a little bit sooner or a little bit later, a couple days prior to actually traveling. So we have full-on sleep protocols for our guys. Let's say they're going overseas from Central Time in Texas over to London. We would start 5 days out. We would start adjusting their sleep schedules and basically push it out to where by the time they actually take off and fly and land, their meal cycles are synced up and their sleep cycles are synced up as best as we can to whatever time zone they're jumping into. And then it's going to be based upon the individual as well. And then what we've done as well is, for guys, I mean, we did this in the NFL too, whether it was on the West Coast going to the East Coast, having some melatonin it's fantastic supplementation. You just do a larger dose of melatonin that night when you get in to help you reset, and then you wake up and you feel great.
Awesome. I think it's pretty incredible, like the amount of sort of tips, like small differences, like the small things, right, to get there. I think one thing I learned as well is like proper hydration is like really important as well.
Yes.
Especially because as you mentioned, like the general stress, it is happening to us all the time, and traveling is very stressful on the body, and water just helps to just detoxify things and to help you feel more adjusted. And I think for any of those people sort of listening and sort of wanting to know more about sort of the fasting, I think Rhonda Patrick has a lot of, she's done loads of podcasts, and she really likes talking about time restricted eating and different diets and eating protocols. So that's a good shout for those of you who want to find out more about that. But I think another interesting point to jump backwards a little bit that you were talking about is sort of how you kind of frame this to players when it comes to having that cutoff time, because I struggled with this a lot as well personally, and for me the biggest difference was made in sort of understanding how important the rest time was to performance, and understanding that I have a certain amount of good hours of focus and good hours of practice during a day, and that you can kill two birds with one stone by sort of saying, okay, by like 6-7 p.m. that's I'm done now. And the time between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. now, that's me sort of winding down to sleep. So like sort of less screens, doing other activities that might be promoting good sleep and so on. And that really helped me massively, because I started to really realize that I was putting in a lot of hours that were really just not very useful.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point, and that could be a whole other podcast in and of itself. So I think really in unpacking that question, how to optimize your day, we'll just kind of bundle up in that.
Yeah.
I think first and foremost, what you need to do is whatever goal you may have, so let's say you want to be the best CSGO player in the world. You need to define that. And what does that actually mean objectively? But then what you need to do is disassociate the outcome and the behaviors, because those are two separate things. The outcome is where you want to go. The behaviors are what get you there. And when you do that, you can actually reverse engineer what that roadmap will look like. And for a lot, that's very challenging. They've never been taught. They don't teach you that in school. They say, hey, you're going to take this test, just study this stuff, take this test, and then you're going to move on to something else. Well, that's not life. Life is not like that. So a lot of the principles that we teach are just life skills. And I'm really big on that. I mean, this is about mentorship and giving people the tools in their toolbox to be successful, not only for in gaming, but in life in general, because that's the most important. The game of life is the most badass video game you will ever play, but you only get one shot at it, right? So kind of going back to your question. So in optimizing your day, I think it's very important to look at your practice schedule and to understand, okay, what are your scrim blocks? How long are your scrim blocks? What are your breaks in between? And so map out what would be like an optimum day for you, and then work backwards, knowing that you want to aim for 7 to 9 hours of sleep. So I would start with that. So you start there, then you start to work backwards. Okay, so what do I need to do an hour before I go to bed? That's going to set me up for success to have the best night's sleep. Okay, so now you're working backwards. And then you say, okay, well, leading up to that, what does my nutrition look like? How am I going to fuel my body to optimize not only my practice play, but my recovery at the end of the day, but then the long-term fueling over successive weeks that didn't turn into months. So then you start to plug that in, and then you fill in the gaps of where your practice blocks go. But then even in your practice blocks, I mean, this is where I'm very excited about is, we start talking about, load management and periodization for not only the physical, but more importantly, the cognitive load and cognitive periodization, and creating practice scripts that make sense, that are in line with your overall objectives and goals. And then you can start reverse engineering what that looks like as well. But that's a completely different conversation where the coaches get involved as well. And that's the fun stuff. But in terms of just your overall day, it's, looking at your practice blocks and knowing where those fall. I'm always a big fan of, first thing in the morning, you want to get up and move. And that doesn't mean go out and run 5 miles. I've always told my guys and gals, like, hey, get up and do 5 minutes of something. Whether it's rolling around on the ground and doing some mobility, or just taking a hot, cold shower. So like a hot, cold contrast. Start out with hot, switch to cold, switch back to hot, do that a couple times, end on cold. And I have a bunch of videos on my YouTube channel you can check out too, and it has all that stuff on there. We can talk about
that's
that
sort of like that promotes like a physiological, like, or forces a physiological response, like a biofeedback type thing, right?
Yeah.
Where, and like, so do you want to, can you explain a little bit, sort of like the hot cold thing?
Yeah. So the hot cold contrast is a fantastic way just to wake up your nervous system, or on the flip side, calm yourself down. So depending on what you end on, so whether you end on cold or end on hot, it could be two different responses. So you have your central nervous system, which is governed by parasympathetic and sympathetic tone. So, excuse me. So sympathetic is fight or flight. Parasympathetic is rest and digest. Okay, so you basically have the accelerator and the brake, and it's going at the same time. And it's any given time you can be floored, or you can, be jacked through the roof. So waking up in the morning, and I hate cold showers, but I know it gets me going. So, I start off with hot. I'm like, oh, man, this feels great. And I'm like, okay, well, here comes the cold, and then I switch over to as cold as I can. So I'll do, 1 minute hot, 3 minutes cold, and I'll do two cycles.
How cold? Because I feel like sometimes, like when I do this, I feel sometimes I cheat. I'm like,
yeah,
well,
I've done that too.
Kind of cold,
Yeah. It depends, man. As cold as my shower can go, and I'll be honest, man, I don't do it every day. Day. If I know like I need a jolt, then I'll get it as cold as I can, and I'll just rock with it. So yeah, it depends. So on the physiological level, what it's doing is it's systemically, it's drawing your blood from the peripheral, from your extremities into your core, and then flushing it back out. So you're getting this circulatory effect. So waking up in the morning and doing a little bit of mobility, and then that hot and cold shower is a fantastic way just to get the blood flowing. And when you get the blood flowing from being horizontal the entire night, what you're doing is priming all the processes in your body, getting ready for the day. So it's just a great way to wake yourself up and get your body going.
Do you find that the sort of circulatory benefits there that really assists or like helps to be preventative towards, let's say, like cold extremities, for example, because
Interesting.
sometimes when like one of the worst things like being a gamer is obviously if your hands are feeling cold.
Yep.
Because sometimes you just get this weird feeling where it's just like your feet and your hands are cold and everything else is fine, and obviously that sucks because you want the blood to be in there, you want it to be warm so it's nice and loose.
Yeah, so part of that too is because you're more sympathetic, so you're kind of under
Yeah.
a lot of stress, and people that tend to be under a lot of stress, their extremities tend to get cold.
Yeah.
So doing some easy mobility, and we'd have our guys do this too. Before they go sit down at the rig, they spend 5 minutes doing mobility, and there's a whole mobility series you can do. Another thing is you can grab like a hyper ice little sphere. We have them in the players lounge. We could take a picture and show it on. I don't know if you be able to show pictures on your podcast on the website or something, but it's a vibrating sphere, and you can use it for soft tissue release. But I'll have my guys just hold it. What it does is it vibrates, so it's increasing the circulatory effect in your hands. I prefer that over a hand warmer any day, because now you're getting the muscles in your hand to activate and wake up. And so just little things like that. But even if it's just doing wrist circles and arm circles and just getting general mobility from your neck down to your ankles is going to improve overall circulation, and that will help as well. Because you got to think, you're sitting down for long periods of time, your body becomes very stagnant. And when you do that consistently over time, your body, it's Wolff's Law, it becomes locked into those positions, and it only becomes worse if you don't correct it. And so a lot of the movement stuff we were talking about earlier is to counteract and balance out those asymmetries that are developed from sitting down for long periods of time.
It's really interesting to think about it, actually, because like the crossover, because when it I think if anyone's on any amount of training as well, it becomes really apparent that when you pump up the muscles with blood, there's like you do your warm-up sets and so on. If you ever try to just go cold on something, like let's say if you do some dips cold or something like that, you'll feel a strength increase on the second set, just because now the muscles are full of blood, and that's great, and there's more resource delivery and so on. But the other thing too is that you have more control because of the strength. And so I think that's like a really interesting point that you bring up, that this is actually something to think about, is how can I be on top of having like good circulation and activating the muscles, bringing the blood, or creating an easy way for the blood to just get where it needs to go. Because I don't think anyone ever talks about that.
There's also a neurological effect too. I mean, the reason why you're stronger on the second set than the first, one, it's the circulatory effect and just the warming of the muscles, but it's also a neurological priming.
Right.
So you're basically greasing the groove of your body to get ready to do that muscle pattern or that movement pattern.
Pavlosacelin.
What's that?
Pavlosacelin.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah, greasing the groove. Yeah. Kettlebell swings all day, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean the same applies, right? I mean, to be quite honest, I mean it is. Again, there's way more similarities than differences when you're looking at traditional sports and esports. And so taking the same concepts of the warm up. Now, granted, the biggest difference obviously is the physical output, but the movement and the physical side still applies. It is still relevant in that you're trying to fuel your brain with energy and blood to create this cognitive effect so that you can maintain focus for longer periods of time and be able to process information at a much faster rate. And so by doing movement, I don't think a lot of people realize this, but the movement feeds into that. It feeds into your mental clarity. Obviously you don't want to do a full-blown workout and sit down and game, although we did have our guys get to that point. But a lot of our training was based on work capacity, and we would camouflage the training sessions with a lot of prehab. So obviously in rehab, you're already injured. Prehab is preventative. So knowing that you're sitting down for longer periods of time, we would structure or weave into the fabric of the programs corrective exercises to balance out the body, all the while improving circulatory effect. So by the time they go and sit down, they're like, shit, I feel pretty good.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, man, just game. Now do your thing.
That's like, I love that point so much. Like, I feel like that, as you said earlier, like this is a podcast in and of itself. I feel like that is also like a podcast in and of itself, because in being interested in training, I've slowly sort of begun and also been injuring myself as well and doing the research to make sure I don't do that again, and to also figure out where my weaknesses are. And I've done so much gaming that a lot of the weaknesses that I do have are based on a combination of my anatomy, which I think a lot of people don't think about, specifically their anatomy and how that impacts what kind of technique and how their training will look like, and how you should treat your body or prepare, like prehab basically, and be preventative of injury for the future. But also it's the case of just feeling good all the time in your body, and that, as you said, like it's all connected and it's going to help performance. So, did I miss anything? I kind of brought you back onto the hot and cold thing
Sure,
because I want to finish that before we go into
yeah.
the
Sorry,
the
I go on
CNS.
tangents.
No, it's perfect. I do as well.
Yeah.
We're probably a dangerous combination. But I want to get back to the CNS.
Yes.
But if you want to continue on, follow your train of thought. If you can remember following the hot and cold and other stuff that you can help to prep yourself.
So in the morning, ending on cold is a great way to prime. Then at night, doing the same sort of protocol but flip the ratio. So 1 minute cold, 3 minute hot is going to create more of a parasympathetic effect and calm your body down. You can also do I'm a huge fan of just doing Epsom salt baths because you get a lot of magnesium. And I think we were talking earlier as well. I mean, a lot of people are deficient in magnesium.
Yeah.
So doing a hot bath for 20 minutes and using that time to really focus in on your breathing, I think breathing is a phenomenal gift, and that is free as well. The air is free. But training your body to take in oxygen and to increase your level of CO2 tolerance, to be able to use less oxygen but more readily, is a fantastic tool just for overall conditioning.
So what are the direct outcomes there? Is it better focus, a better endurance, or what are the sort of specific?
Anytime you can improve your breathing capacity, it's just going to improve everything. I mean, you can, whether it's for a meditative practice to calm yourself down, or we'll have our guys do some breathing in between games. 3 breaths in between a game just to reset and reload. That kind of helps with being able to disregard everything that happened in the previous game. I mean, I think a lot of players will get tilted because they can't let go.
Yeah.
And I know we're staring off the hot cold again, but
that's all good. Like going into mindfulness.
But just to tie off the hot cold. I mean, there's fantastic ways you can do it in the morning, do it at night. Again, it's going to cause a circulatory effect. It could feed into whether parasympathetic or sympathetic, so fight or flight or rest and digest. Ending on cold is going to be more sympathetic, get you jacked up. Ending on hot is going to be more sympathetic and bring you down. So now going back to the mindfulness part, and I promise I'm not usually all over the place like this, but I'm enjoying jamming out like this.
It's probably my fault.
This is fun, man. This is fun. The mindfulness part is key. So being able to breathe and bring yourself down, I mean, it's a great way to auto-regulate those two systems, the sympathetic and parasympathetic. I mean, just by doing, there's a protocol called Breath of Fire where it's a very short, or it's a kind of an in-between inhale through your nose, and it's a kind of a violent exhale. And you do that short burst for extended period, 30 breaths. By the end of that, I mean, you're feeling alert and awake. Whereas if you were to do box breathing, so 5 in, 5 second pause, 5 count out, 5 second hold, and you imagine doing a box, that's going to drop your heart rate down and give you a very cool, calm, collected state. So by using just those 2 practices, you can get yourself up or get yourself down. And then that kind of leads into knowing yourself. And, when you look at the inverted U of sports psychology of arousal, you're basically, you don't want to go too far on the curb where you're over aroused and you're over jacked up, or you don't want to be under aroused or, underperform. You want to find that sweet spot. So knowing your body and knowing what's going to get you in this state of flow, and then using the breathing to feed into that is a fantastic tool for the toolbox. Music does the same thing.
Yeah.
So people have certain playlists where, like, hey, I'm going to go lift weights, or I'm going to go game, whatever it may be. It's like they listen to certain playlists. Well, if you pay attention to whatever songs you gravitate towards, some it may be, some hard style dubstep. Others it may be, classical music. It really depends on the individual. But knowing that about yourself is very interesting as well, because you can use that as another tool to layer on or put in your toolbox to say, okay, if I'm too jacked up right now, my hands are cold, I'm all over the place, well, then maybe I need to bring myself back down to get dialed in.
So that to me is like interesting too, from the perspective of reference points, because yes. I found that quite useful. Let's say sometimes what I'll do is I really like using the steam room or the sauna after a workout, and I think that that has a lot of a whole host of sort of like circulatory benefits. It triggers some physiological benefits as well. But beyond that I like to use that and take advantage to try to do some meditation practice and do some mindfulness. Good. And I found that when I'm in those states, I'm like learning to understand those states. If I sort of create a snapshot and almost a reference of like what that is, like almost like a memory that I can go back to. I can then summon that later, and then it has almost like this reverse effect, like a biofeedback type effect, which I found quite useful in helping me, like as you said before, like accept whatever negative thing has just happened and allow me to sort of just move on. And so that's really, I like that you brought that up.
Yeah. So that snapshot is what I would call anchoring.
Right.
So you have that snapshot, you understand, okay, this is a good feeling. Like this is whatever got me to this point's great. You want to anchor that. So whatever you did up to that point, you can then reference that to get back to that state. I know that we talked about tech earlier.
Yeah.
I don't know if people are familiar, but SubPack. Are you familiar with SubPack at all?
No.
So SubPack it's a fantastic piece of tech. I mean, I love music in general. So it's a backpack with a subwoofer in it. Okay.
Nice.
So it was originally designed for audio engineers to feel the feedback of the bass that they were putting in. But you can wear it when you listen to music, and you can use it for a number of different things. And there's actually an app, a company called Apollo, and researchers from the University of Pittsburgh, they created this app where there's 5 different zones. And they discovered that different frequencies of bass can actually elicit a physiological response. And it's so cool, man. So basically, I'll wear my SubPack, and I have my app, and I'll use it either for meditation or neural priming, or even when I'm just working. Like I have my backpack on. It's pretty sleek too. I mean, it's pretty cool looking. My headphones, and they have I'll show you later, but they have different settings that you can choose. And it's all about just having a certain frequency that keeps you locked in and in the zone. And your body, your heart rate actually sync up to it.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
Yeah, so it's a great way to get some feedback, so this haptic feedback to then get your physiological feedback system dialed into it. So that's another cool way to get yourself primed or calmed down.
So I think, again, for those listeners, I'm familiar with the idea of biofeedback. Is I think. Another way to sort of think about it as well is like we have all these ways to sort of trigger like what we want as opposed to reacting in a certain way. And some people call this sort of meta heuristics, where your body just heuristics, our body just has certain behaviors and patterns of behaviors when we get certain stimulus. But so if you become aware of what your behaviors might be or what they look like, let's say in a body language, we know that it's pretty common knowledge if someone's crossing their arms, maybe they're feeling a little standoffish, a little bit uncomfortable, and if they instead sort of put their arms out, and they're going to be more confident, more personable, and that's what a confident person looks like. So if you're feeling standoffish now, and you can think, oh, I'm actually in this position, this actually tells me that, oh, I'm actually feeling a bit uncomfortable. How about I change? And that's you interfering in a sense with this process. And then what happens is your body responds, and then your mind follows, which is really cool. And so that's like this feedback stuff that you're talking about. Because I think sometimes people, it can get, like, if you haven't really experienced it or played around with it, I feel like it can be hard to grasp the idea, but it's really powerful.
Oh, it's powerful.
And there's so many different ways, like you're saying, there with the music and everything else, and creating reference points and sort of understanding how to generate more of a, meditation aside, but like just understanding of what it feels like to certain things. Like, what does this feel like? What am I feeling right now? And creating a sensitivity, like a palette for your own body and its experiences. Really useful.
I mean, that's the human experience, right?
Yeah.
And that could be a whole other podcast as well.
Yeah.
But you called out a great point. I mean, it's a noticing and naming that current state that you're in, which a lot of people just kind of blow right past. So when I've worked with guys in the past, let's say they're classic, they tilt all the time.
Yes.
I'm like, okay. What happens in that moment? There's a trigger. There's an obvious trigger, but what happens before the trigger and what happens after? Can you create reference points up to that point where if you notice you have a certain tendency to tilt in certain situations, what happens leading up to that? Can you notice and name it before it actually happens? Because if you can catch it before, great. And then it's a matter of creating tools and interventions to then figure out what happens thereafter. But again, it's just part of the human experience and just being present in the moment and experiencing it, noticing and naming it, and then having tools in your toolbox to then move forward and navigate that space. And a lot of times people, what I've experienced is they just kind of blow past it all. They're like, oh, well, I'll fix it next time.
Yeah.
Well, next time it may be the difference between a win and a loss, so you probably should figure it out right now. And that's where a lot of the mindfulness comes in. And it's not all the woo-woo stuff. I mean, it's
focused, right? It's not like
right?
losing your mind. It's like it's actually being very specifically focused.
Yes.
Which is what I think people don't understand.
Yes. I mean, and then that can go back to optimizing your day. I mean, layering that in as well. Like having times where you can actually, sit and visualize, and a debrief at the end. I've been around a lot of teams, and even in pro sports and traditional sports, their debriefs are not very good. Having a firm after-action review where you can sit down, compartmentalize, and unpack what happened and say, okay, what were the lessons learned? What were the big wins? What were the lessons learned? What were the mistakes, right? What do we do well? Okay, let's not make those same mistakes in the next practice. Let's go do that. And taking away some key learning points, and then being able to track that over time and then look back and reflect and say, okay, well, how do we do this week in practice? How do we do this last month in practice? Are we making the same mistakes? Because if we are, then we need to go back and think about how we're structuring practice and the different set pieces and whatever it may be. So then again, that kind of feeds back into just to this overall awareness of what's happening day to day.
It's interesting too, because I know that some people can become disconnected because I know that some frustration or anger can be elicited if you're going to be a professional player, you've already sort of attached that as your identity. That's become a part of who you are. You invest so much time in it. If you fail at it, you're obviously going to be angry. But I think some people get frustrated as well when they feel like they don't know what the next step is to improve. And so that's why I also really like you saying, how did you put it? Like name it and
notice and name.
Notice and name, yeah. And linguistic tools, like creating like a linguistic way, like a way to understand what is actually happening is so important. And I think that's also overlooked.
Yes.
Because if we were in a world where, imagine, like, we couldn't communicate, we didn't have words to sort of what's the best way to put it, to sort of encapsulate a variety of feelings and sort of categorize it, then we would just be in the Stone Age still. Like that's how you learn and understand what is valuable. Everything is linked to that. So I think it's super important, and that's what's really why, like, what I think people should be thinking about when they're learning anything is what are we actually dealing with here?
Yep.
And so the more data, the better. The more linguistic tools, the better. And I think it's also really interesting to sort of for people to understand where the next step is. Yep. and not get disconnected. Because in teams, sometimes what I see is that, as you were talking about, sometimes a team will be addressed as a team, and so the individual's experience, which is so intense to them, is not necessarily addressed, and they themselves might not have the tools. They'll be very talented innately, but they might not have the tools to get there themselves. So did you find that this was ever an issue? Do you work like very closely on an individual basis and tailor absolutely everything, or do you have more of a general approach, or is it a need-must type situation?
Oh, that's a great question, and that kind of ties into this overall picture of this load management and understanding that the teams are created of collective individuals, right? So yeah, I've worked with specific individuals one-on-one, and I'm not a sports psychologist, but there are some principles and tools that you can apply and readily use on a day-to-day basis, and a lot of it has to do with just understanding the mechanics of like you said, linguistics, like noticing and naming, understanding triggers, working backwards and forwards from those triggers, and having a proper after-action review where you can actually unpack what happened in that last training session to then figure out, okay, collectively as a team, what did we do well? Okay, individually, and you kind of drop down to the individual aspects. Like in the National Football League, they have team meetings, position meetings, and individual meetings. I mean, there's a reason why they do that. And there's things you can perfect in that system as well, but they realize that it's not just the team itself, it's individuals that make up that team. And the team's only going to be as strong as your weakest link. So you need to make sure everybody is dialed in. And this kind of brings up another point too, is, in looking at burnout amongst players.
Yeah.
It's I'm a firm believer that it's a lack of coping mechanisms that tie into this burnout. Because burnout, in my opinion, what we ask other players too, I mean, it's just overall stress. It accumulates, and they're like, all right, I'm done. Why does it have to be that way? And I think if we could do a better job of creating these tools in the toolbox to have better coping mechanisms, both for in-game and all the peripherals, life skills and understanding proper player development and building out a more complete human being, you're going to play much longer. Because it's all about performance and longevity. And that's going to benefit the individual, and it's going to benefit the teams as well, because if they're going to have a greater ROI on their investment for the player, the player's happier, performance and well-being's through the roof, they're playing longer. I mean, it's just a win-win all around.
It's I actually think it's amazing how much esports could grow in this department.
It's
for you,
exciting,
it must
man.
be like a kid in a candy store. It's like, I don't know which way to turn. There's so much to be done and developed in that category, because obviously the other thing is we are dealing with youngsters who are, I know it's the same in sports to a degree, but because I guess this tends to be less social, I think a lot of the gamers will gravitate more towards stuff that might be not necessarily antisocial, but like more introverted activities perhaps. And also the time spent traveling, and the current schedules are not great for players. Like players should have more free time, and we're only now getting to this point where some of the best team in the world, Astralis, they have a really good approach as to understanding like what how much off time they need.
Yep.
And one of the problems I think was not only because we have all these tournaments, but it's because a lot of the team owners really want their players, of course, to go to everything if they possibly can, because that's more exposure, more money for the team and the brand.
Sure.
So it's and so there's this like weird sort of consideration which is a little bit out of the hands of some of the players. So as you said, like understanding the coping mechanisms is super important. Is there anything in general that you've noticed seems to be commonly an issue that has an easy fix when it comes to this kind of thing? Like you look at teams or players, and it's just this is esports. This tends to be a common issue, or anything like that.
Yeah. My first reaction, my knee-jerk reaction with this is that I think teams practice maybe too much.
Yeah.
And that's just, again, an outsider looking in. I don't come from the esport world, but I know that there is a minimum effective dosage in which you can get the results you want in a certain period of time. And I think a lot of times players go well beyond that upper threshold of what's beneficial, because there is a point of diminishing returns.
Yeah.
And so when you're staying up late and you're doing solo queue or playing whatever, I mean, that's just adding on more stress to your plate. I mean, imagine you have a cup and you're filling, and stress is water, and you just keep adding water to your cup. Eventually it's going to overfill. And so understanding that from a coaching perspective and how they're creating their practice scripts day to day and week to week, and then factoring in the travel schedules. I mean, that's where, when you say being a kid in a candy store, I mean, this is my wheelhouse of looking at load management and saying, okay, let's work with the coaches and let's understand on a much deeper level that these teams are created of collective individuals. Okay, but from a team standpoint, what can we do to facilitate the best practice schedule possible to optimize and allow them to be most successful on game day, which is when it is the most important. So proper periodization of the number of hours played per day, and then balancing that out with having a social life and having, just being a kid, man, and going out and having fun and being with your friends. And I mean, understanding it's all about balance,
It will come back to haunt you later. Like
exactly.
Maybe you're playing well now, but maybe the lack of the social life in 3 years, you'll start to be like, I really wish I had this. I really wish.
And
I
then
had
that leads into burnout too. So imagine if you started right out the gate with a good enough balance to where they felt fulfilled in all aspects of their life. So I'd say, one of the biggest things to look at is just the practice schedules and understanding how many hours per day is absolutely necessary. And a lot of that, I mean, like Cal Newport in his book Deep Work talks about, 4 to 5 hours of real meaningful work. And then anything after that tends to be just a drop off. So being very smart in how you create your practice blocks and giving yourself enough time to reset in between. And there's a couple variations of ways you can go about doing that, but I think that's probably one of the easier ways to do it. But then again, it goes back to, well, this is the way we've always done it.
Yes.
Let's play for 8 to 12 hours a day. I'm like, okay, that's great. It got to where you are now, but will it keep you in the game? Yeah. Because the key now is like, you've got to that level, and that's awesome. Let's keep you here. Let's have you have the longest career possible. I'm curious to see who's going to be the gamer who could play for 20 years.
Absolutely,
Because you could. Yeah. You literally could. I mean, that's what's so amazing about this sport is that you can have a very, very long career if you create the lifestyle and create the support systems that are be conducive to do so.
Yeah, that's actually been one of the funny sort of notions that we've not really had the data to test yet is people initially assumed, oh, you can't keep going forever because it's about reactions, which is not really not really a thing. I mean, reactions are obviously important, but there's so much more is more important, and you can cheat that in so many ways. And so there's not really we don't really have, it's so new, like I think maybe the oldest player, I think from a mechanical perspective, as we describe it in Counter-Strike, that's the best is Forrest, who he's still incredible, still able to play like career best level, and he's 30. He's been doing it since 2005 or 6, so he's been doing it for a good 12 years, and he's I don't know that we have too many more players older than him, but he's in that age range by far the best, I would say, unless I'm missing somebody. And I would love to see him playing longer as well, because obviously from a brand perspective, that's amazing. That's like so cool.
Could you imagine, like, he's probably seen damn near everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Imagine like the IQ on the gaming IQ on him.
Yes.
I mean, that's why you look at guys like Tom Brady in the National Football League. His football IQ is through the roof. I mean, he's been playing for a long time. And then, was on the 49ers, like, Justin Smith. I mean, that guy was a phenomenal defensive lineman, but he had played for a long time. He knew what was going to happen. He would he would change the line himself. The D-line coach would do his job, but, Justin was changing plays on the line just because he had played for so long. He could sense what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And then, sure enough, they'd get a sack or whatever it may be. And so I think, that's what's exciting too. As you can extend the careers of the players, I mean, think about just the level of talent and the level of knowledge. If you're on a team with somebody who's been playing for 15 years, imagine what you can learn from that individual.
Yeah.
And that's exciting too. I mean, then it's just continually evolving this knowledge acquisition and passing it along to these younger players. And too, it's all about sharing. Like, knowledge is power, but only if you share it. So I think having these players that can extend their careers and then sharing the stories of what they did to stay at the top of their game. And I'll reference back, the traditional sports. The guys who've been playing for the longest, they always swoop up guys under their wing. It's like these young bucks, these rookies, they show them the road. But you gotta prove yourself worthy of that. And then once you are, I mean, it's like they're just there to just drop knowledge on you.
Yeah, and within a good system and a team, it's amazing what happens. Like, we've got some good examples in Counter-Strike of that, but we've also got some good examples of the opposite, where you have maybe some of the more veteran players who have been there and done it, but they're playing within a bad system or a bad culture. And then those players are like the younger players who are very talented and maybe taught that, I don't actually have to work very hard, or they're just generally the wrong behaviors. So, but it makes an enormous difference. I've seen also lots of like really compelling young talents in Counter-Strike, and I've seen them they're just not in the right team. They're just not. They just don't have that guy to guide them. And you see then maybe like a year or two later, I think we had a similar thing with Renegades to a certain extent recently, where it just like we had two players, JKS and Azza, who everyone has seen their potential, and they're the hottest talents coming out of the Oceanic region for so very long, but they could never find any success, and it was always very frustrating. And there's just so many examples of it, just how talent can get brought up, and that can be improved so much. Like, I really feel like if you were to go around and do a bunch of workshops, and if there was generally more awareness around this sort of thing, that we would have like an incredible scene just filled with amazing talents, and it would just speed up the process massively. Speaking of which, what has been the reception to you going around and entering esports and doing the kind of work that you do? Because in theory, like everything you're talking about, I think it makes perfect sense. Sure. I think it's amazing. I think that's the next step. But is that also being reflected from a business standpoint? Are businesses really interested right now, all the gaming organizations?
Yeah, great question. It's been an interesting road, because I think it's still quite a novel concept. Although I think when you take a step back, you realize that it's very fundamental and necessary. I've talked to a lot of other teams and orgs, and they're curious and they're receptive. Some may not be ready to fully dive in and explore it on a deeper level, but it will come with time, especially as more and more money gets invested into esports, and it becomes more, it takes after more of this traditional model of how teams and organizations are ran. And I'm not talking about the corporate side. I'm talking about just going back to the 3 S's, structure, systems, and scheduling, and having it be more dialed in. And there's a lot of teams that do that quite well. but there's always room for improvement. And so when you start to look at those models and optimize within those models, I mean, the sky's the limit. And that's what makes me most excited is, okay, there's already an existing system out there that could be optimized. It's just, again, going back to your point about culture, it's finding the right culture and understanding the why. Like, why are we here? Once you identify that and then everyone can resonate with it, the what and the how just fall into place. And so I've had some phenomenal conversations, and I'm excited about what 2019 brings. And just really looking forward to having a positive impact in the space, because I've seen what traditional sports has done, both what they've done well, but more importantly, the downfalls. And that's what I'm really most excited about, is bringing like these lessons learned. Let's not make the same mistakes in esports. And right now it's more or less a blank canvas of what can be done on the performance side, but more importantly, the player development side. What I was building with Infinite and Optic was actually 3 pillars. The first one was player development, both personal and professional, bringing together programs around financial education, social media, PR, relationships, both healthy and toxic, time management, stress management. That was one bucket. The second bucket was the esports performance, and that's everything around lifestyle, mindset, nutrition, movement, recovery. And then the last one is let's build a bridge program to give mentorship and guidance so that gamers could be successful for life after gaming.
Right. Yeah.
So these are the 3 big pillars that I'm really excited about, because those concepts I pulled over from the NFL and collegiate sports. What went well and what went wrong. It's like, okay, we've got this recipe now. And again, it's not trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. Things will be different, but that's the exciting part. It's this tinkering and figuring out what fits and what doesn't, and it all starts with a conversation. And then going back to your point about, this talent identification and selection, that's something I've been thinking very deeply on as well, especially with a lot of the science that's been coming out. We did a study with the University of Montreal with our Overwatch team and an academy team, where we were looking at a cognitive profile. And so we did a couple of cognitive assessments and some testing, and we cross-referenced that with 4,000 other elite athletes in traditional sports. And the preliminary data coming back is there's obvious similarities and differences, but the similarities are really profound, and the differences are quite interesting as well. So once we can start compartmentalizing, this cognitive assessment and saying, okay, well, what makes a great gamer? What are some 3 things we can look for in a gamer on a cognitive standpoint? Let's identify that, and then let's start looking across different gaming titles. Are there similarities? And then within the positions of each gaming title, are there similarities and what are the differences? And you can start, paring down and saying, okay, well, what are the things we're actually looking for? But then you factor in the social factors. Like in the NFL Combine, they do full battery of cognitive assessments, both from the objective standpoint and reaction processing, but also from a personality standpoint, like what's going to make a great team, and understanding, the interactions and understanding social cues. And these are all important things, but that's what excites me too, is understanding the talent identification and selection and having a proper process to do that, to elicit the best chance to make the best team.
That's actually quickly, I want to go back a little bit.
Sure.
And you mentioned sort of lessons learned from sort of the mainstream sports.
Yes.
So what are the sort of biggest mistakes that you think have been made that you can help us, hopefully have us avoid?
Yeah. The one I always go to is creating proper education on how to get better support structures.
Okay.
And so what I mean by that is, this isn't anything against the NFLPA. I think they do a great job. However, I feel that, they'll present information. They'll have a workshop on financial education. And for the most part, that's it. It's kind of like a one and done. They may circle back to it, but in my mind, what you'd want to do is create almost like an education campaign. And so what I'm fond of is breaking things down into habits that then compound over time and turn into lifestyle changes. So the same way I would build out my education for my players, the same way I would build out all layers of the player development, the esports performance, and the bridge program, is create interventions or programs where you have workshops for maybe the first month, or every 2 weeks is good, a little bit of information, and then you can slowly build on that information over time. So it's not too much too soon too often. It's this idea of like fence posting. So when you're building a fence, you drop a fence post, you walk a couple feet, drop another fence post, but you always circle back and make sure you reinforce the fence.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's the same principle. So it's creating proper programs around that to really make sure it sticks. And it's been quite successful for what I've done with my guys. And, you know, it's really cool to see. Again, it's just the mentorship side of it too. You know, then also kind of giving them a heads up, like, hey, this kind of rookie induction, like, hey, when you come into, you know, pro gaming, this is what you can expect. Here's your onboarding process. Like, here are the tools and resources. Here are the contact information. Like, give them a proper introduction to here's everything you need, or at least the start of everything you need to be successful as a professional gamer, and have, you know, points of contact for them to reference and have these resources in place for them to reach out to. And they do that in traditional sports as well, but it can always be done better.
Yeah, that's what it's all about, right?
Exactly.
Just keep improving the process, and it is exciting, like the blank slate of esports. I want to jump back a little bit because I just remembered a topic I wanted to go through. I don't want to keep you forever, which I mean we can definitely follow us.
I can do this all day, man. Yeah.
But I wanted to touch on the CNS a bit, and we can do maybe like supplementation and then maybe nutrition just like a bit afterwards. So the central nervous system is obviously like very important. I think as a quick outline, when people think about sort of strength training, it's you know it's a practice element as well as which is sort of teaching your body you know how to fire off which muscles in which order to make that process efficient. And that's kind of what the CNS is doing in strength, and that has strength gains as opposed to just the physical sort of muscle itself building up and so on. So how do you think that actually also applies, or how we could think about it applying to gaming like Counter-Strike, for example? Like, what is it important? Is it something that we can think about and somehow get an edge if we understand how to approach it better, or what do you think about it?
Interesting. I would say one of the interesting like sequencing that you can think about is how you can maintain your posture. You know, so for instance, when you're going to do a deadlift, there's a certain sequence you want to go through in terms of bracing your core. You know, you want to squeeze the glutes, you want to bring your rib cage down, and you want to like squeeze the lats. And in that step, you basically lock in your spine, and then you can then pick up a load. I think something similar could be done when you're gaming, although you want to be thinking about bracing your core the entire time, but having these certain cues to where if you could feel your body start slouching in certain positions, again, it goes back to the notice the name, you can kind of do a quick reset. So I think while, again, in traditional sports or traditional physical activity, that may make more sense. In gaming, it may not have as much crossover, more so just having the ability to notice when you're starting to fall back into unfavorable positions and to kind of righten yourself up. And this kind of goes back into your point. You know, body positioning is key. So if you feel yourself starting to slouch, like let's say you're getting your butt kicked in a game, you're starting to slouch, well, maybe notice and name that and like get a better upright posture, improve your circulatory effect, and get back in the game. That could be something you can use. And I have to think about that a little bit more in terms of the sequencing on a deeper level for the CNS.
Yeah, I mean, because one of the ways I think about it at least is like we mentioned. Is a project called Halo Neuroscience or Halo
Neuroscience?
Halo Neuroscience. So that's, and correct me if I'm wrong. I've seen this like I think on Instagram and floating around on the internet, and people. I think I listened to a podcast on it a while ago. It's sort of this project where you have this wearable tech. It's like kind of like headphones, and the idea is. It's supposed to help stimulate or make the neuroplasticity effect sort of more efficient, and that's sort of basically whenever you're doing, let's say, you know, if you're practicing like a stroke in tennis or something, or a backhand or a forehand or something like that in your practice, like if you do that for 5 weeks, you know, over time your brain learns exactly it creates the right neural pathways, and it reinforces them, and then you get better and your technique improves over time. And so the idea with this product is that it sort of shortens that time or makes it more efficient. Do you think that's a...
Yeah, that's actually we were going to do a study with Halo Neuroscience and looking at that in gamers, and I still want to kick that off.
I think in games like Counter-Strike, we'll fine motor movements. I actually think that it'd be a really good test.
Yeah. I mean, they're a fantastic group of individuals over there, and they're doing some really cool stuff. Essentially, Halo Neuroscience, what it does, it's a neural primer, And so it allows you to optimize that window of the learning efficiency. And so, yeah, to your point, I mean, if you were doing a backhand in tennis, you know, it's greasing the groove, right? So essentially what you're doing is priming yourself for those motor patterns. I mean, in gaming, it's fine motor skills, but it's still motor skills.
Yeah.
And again, in looking at specific sequencing or the shooting, the aim, like we were going to use Aim Hero to use it to test and retest and say, okay, well, are there improvements in this? And I think there would be. And so that's exciting. So to be determined, you know, but I think we're going to circle back, or we're going to get that study done. So if there's any pro amateur gamers out there that want to participate, hit me up, let me know, we'll do it.
Actually a fan of Aim Hero, like that one a lot.
Yeah.
So another thing, actually, going back to sort of, you brought up posture.
Yep.
Again, there are actually some bigger topics I do want to I'll hit you up again in the future.
Yeah.
But I've always been really against what have become gaming chairs, and I've always preferred the office chairs, like what Herman Miller might provide, because for me it feels like I get a lot better support and freedom, and the gaming chairs are sort of like race car chairs but sort of made a bit more comfortable, and now they're becoming gaming chairs. And so how do you how do you choose your chair, and how do you sort of maybe habituate yourself into having a good sitting posture for gaming at the get-go? Because someone like me, I'm always fighting with this. I lean in because it's more intense. I'm more focused. So I lean in. It's very difficult to sort of figure that out. So what are your thoughts on this?
It's so funny you bring that up. I've actually talked to Herman Miller about, you know, this concept, and to be honest, I never understood why the gaming chairs are the way they are. They're modeled after race car seats.
No, exactly. Yeah, it's just
which
sort of
is,
branding thing.
When
really.
you're in Formula One and NASCAR, you are glued to your seat because you're going 200 plus miles per hour. In gaming, to your point, I mean, you're leaning forward. And so I never really quite understood. I mean, they look cool. And some of them could be comfortable. For me personally, I tend to be more up out of my seat anyways. And then also just looking at the different ergonomics of how people kind of set up their the keyboard and the mice and everything. I mean, everyone's different.
Yeah.
And so I think taking that into consideration and understanding your own body mechanics and how you best operate, I don't necessarily have a solution in terms of the chair itself, but mainly just be mindful of your position and your posture. So a lot of times people tend to be overextended, so the rib cage tends to lift farther up. But if you can bring your rib cage down and set your core and get your sit bone or sit muscles, set up in a way where your spine's neutral, that's going to allow you to maintain that position for longer periods of time, but then also improving blood flow. Because again, everything I talk about is going to try to go back to the circulatory effect. If you restrict blood flow to your brain, I mean, you're not going to be thinking at your optimum. I mean, what if I told you reaching your true potential was just the beginning, but part of that was just looking at the fundamental principles of how you're sitting and improving blood flow, right? I mean, then that's a whole new ball game. So I think it's a matter of understanding what positions you tend to be in, what feels good, but then optimizing, whether it's bracing your core and doing exercises outside of the chair to strengthen the entire body to be able to maintain these positions for longer periods of time.
It is also, as you said, everybody's different is such a key thing, because when you go onto YouTube and let's say you want to learn how to do a deadlift or something, you're probably going to find someone who's got the perfect anatomy for a deadlift and has really good genetics. And then you'll try to mimic what he's doing, and I have long femurs and a long torso, so deadlifts were back exercises. And then I found that because my flexibility on top of that wasn't amazing, then lack of hamstring flexibility meant that it was it was forcing my pelvic tilt into then rounding my back, and then my back's in a position where the deadlift gave me an injury.
Compromised position,
So it's all these compensatory things are happening, and that is just not having an understanding of your body. And there's actually been a piece of content that I've been wanting to put together, which is understanding how to do this setup from more of a scientific perspective, understanding, for example, what you need to achieve within the game and how that relates to your physical capabilities, anatomical capabilities. For example, with your wrist, from a neutral position, if you're going to be someone that favors aiming with a wrist, what you need to do in the game is be able to flick maybe between 45 degrees left and right without moving that. And obviously the external, do you call it external with the, so yeah, the external internal rotation of the wrist is different on the inside as opposed to the outside. So I feel like there's a sciencey approach to all of this, which has not actually currently been done to kind of optimize those things and have you be very comfortable, because most people will sit down and they'll have no idea of what habits should I get, like you said, like the blank slate thing. I feel like there's a lot of potential to have people start out right when so many of us can't be safe. I can't be, can't be safe. But
yeah, I mean, I love it, man. I mean, these are all the questions I ask on a daily basis. Let's look at what is absolutely essential for a gamer to be successful, and then what are the components of that, and then what are the ideas and the interventions we can create to facilitate, to put somebody in the best position to be successful. So yeah, if you want to talk to an ergonomics specialist, I'll hook you up. One of my buddies is one. And we've been talking about that quite a bit. Yeah. We're always.
I've also tried to reach out to Herman Miller.
yeah. I mean,
they're
awesome, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm incredibly grateful for the people in my network, and I have these conversations a lot. I mean, that's probably the reason why I want to start my own podcast too.
Yeah.
It's, I want to bridge the gap between what's being done in traditional sports and how we can apply it in esports, and create a dialogue around, okay, it's not starting over, but it's a evolution, right? Let's continue to evolve in what we think is possible, knowing what we know, but also being very cognizant of the fact that we don't know everything. We only know what we know, so that means there's a lot to be learned out there, right? And that's what fires me up the most. That, and then sharing that with everybody.
So quickly then, because you came from the traditional sports area, did you have any concept of gaming before that? Really, did you play any games or know about esports before? Or?
Yeah. So I played a little bit of games growing up, but to be honest, I was never very good at it. I was always more of a physical person. So we talked about martial arts. I mean, I've been doing martial arts for about 15 years. And so the physicality of that, like for me, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was it's a body and mind chess game. And I've done many different styles of martial arts, but Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu resonated with me the most. But you can learn something from all of those arts and all of those practices and apply it. There's no difference. There are governing dynamics amongst everything. And there's a common thread that links together everything. And if you pull it hard enough, everything comes together. So to your point or your question, it's like I knew of esports, I knew of gaming. I had no idea how big it had gotten. But when I started to look at it, I was like, wow, this is awesome.
Yeah, I was going to say, because the common thing is that people that come from outside, they look at it like, is that a sport? Like,
oh man, you should have heard my colleagues and my mentors when I was like, I'm going into game, and they're like, what? I mean, I came from a pretty prestigious pedigree in collegiate coaching, where I coached for some phenomenal coaches at UCLA and USC and Auburn, Louisiana Lafayette, and San Jose State. And some of them got it, some of them didn't initially, but now they all get it. And they're all just like hitting me up like, hey man, so how's that going? Because there's so much to be learned in this space that could be brought back into traditional sports. And so that's what fires me up, man.
So, give me an example of that. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, so for me, like one of the many conversations I'm having right now is, what can we learn from a cognitive standpoint of how to optimize day-to-day training, and can that be used in traditional sports?
Right.
So this whole idea of cognitive load and periodization, we do it very well in traditional sports on the physical side. We work backwards from game day. So the load in which we place on the individual athletes and the team varies throughout the days, throughout the weeks, because we want to make sure we peak on game day.
Yeah.
So if we play American football on Sunday, Saturday looks very different than Friday, Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Monday. Okay. Can we do that same thing on the cognitive side? My strong feeling is yes. And how we do that is to be determined in terms of looking at the different variables and what are the correlations between these objective markers we're looking at and subjective. Then how do we apply that to this gaming space? I mean, quite honestly, that's what keeps me up at night, because I get so fired up on it. I'm like a mad scientist, man. I got whiteboards in my house. I'm just like going at it, That's the stuff I love. Nice. So yeah, and that's one of the things. The other part is, understanding talent identification and selection. Again, what can we learn on the cognitive side of what really makes, a badass gamer to be most successful, and are there any correlations between what athletes are doing on the traditional side? And then if that's true, you know, how do we build that bridge, right? I mean, how do we have that conversation? You know, and I'll just kind of tie this in, and you know, I'm not very into sci-fi, but I have been recently. And, you know, I'm a firm believer that when virtual reality hits, and what I mean by that is that when it becomes like, you know, like mass scale.
Yeah, like very cheap, very accessible.
Yes. I think that the landscapes of sports is going to change as we know it, because what's going to happen is when it becomes like Ready Player One, which I'm a firm believer that it will, when you are running, jumping, moving in space, but in a virtual reality, everything I've done in my career on the physical side in terms of periodization and load management is going to dovetail with everything we're doing on the cognitive side, load and periodization, and the technical, tactical, the physical, and the cognitive preparation of these athletes. It's going to become one. And now we're talking about creating a whole new badass breed of athlete. And that, my friend, is what fires me up.
I see. Like,
dude.
I'm getting it now because I'm seeing what your long-term picture looks like.
Dude.
So that's really cool.
Yes.
Because I always found it really interesting, actually, because having done this myself, like since the year 2000, when competitive gaming really started to take off, well, in a smaller scale, but it was very niche back then, but still, I always thought it was fascinating, just from a performance perspective, the idea of, like, you know, first of all, just as a player, being curious on how to be better myself, like understanding, like, you know, how do I hit flow state all the time? Because it becomes really apparent that when you're playing, it's like, okay, some days I'm much better than others, and then some moments I'm untouchable, and I'm in this, okay, and that's flow state. Okay, how do I achieve that more often? How do I get consistency around that? And just that journey was like always just so fascinating, and that's stuck with me for, like, you know, 18 years. I'm just so fascinated and just so obsessed by it. And I really like in video games, like a game like Counter-Strike. And I think, again, I have never played any sport at a professional level, so I'm not necessarily in the best place to comment. But I feel like in gaming there is, like, the amount of decision making and sort of mental gymnastics you have to do is ridiculous.
Sure.
But you also have to marry it, you know, with the conscious and the subconscious brain, because all these sort of performance that comes from just executing technique, like, you know, just, you know, shooting and moving around and all the mechanics and stuff, that's best placed in your subconscious, and that's all your preparation, all your training goes in there. But there is an element, like, you know, where it's going to be communication, where it's going to be reading the situation or calling to your teammates, where you're sort of consciously having to also act at the same time. And both, you can't be in both places at the same time, but to have the best performance, you have to be in the subconscious mode. And so I love that this balance is, like, very difficult to have consistency with that. And that's one of the reasons why it's like very, very amazing when you see people that are just godlike at the sport, because there's very few that can do that to a very, very high level all the time. And I'm like, how do you get there? I know that there's definitely an approach, because I'm a believer, I don't know if you are too, that pretty much anybody can be, you know, in the top 1% of pretty much anything. It's just all comes down to approach. That's kind of my belief, at least.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely some truth to that. You know, I believe that things are inherently complex, but that doesn't mean they need to be complicated. Those are two separate things.
Yeah, you said that earlier. I like that.
Yes,
yeah.
Man. It's like things are very, very complex. The human body is incredibly complex. But when you can break it down into its essential components, it's quite simple in how it all interacts. It doesn't need to be complicated. People tend to overcomplicate things. And so I think by truly, you know, creating that outcome goal and understanding the behaviors that feed into that, you then have a much clearer roadmap to ultimately being successful. But then you got to understand, like, a person's definition of success is relative. So being honest with yourself and what that means is very important, because there's an objective and a subjective side to that. But yeah, I think it's having the tools in the toolbox to be successful, and everybody has the potential to do amazing things. And again, it kind of, what I said earlier, it's like, what if I told you that reaching your true potential is just the beginning? I mean, imagine that. Like, you reach a point in which, okay, you have finally opened the gates to where you can now truly optimize your body to a point in which you can feel those flow states, and you understand yourself to a level in which you never thought possible, where you know how to navigate life and always be on, but then also have the ability to compartmentalize and shut off and reset. And so, to the point about practicing, when I was in college, I did a summer abroad in the Czech Republic, and it was all based around performance psychology and performance training. And one of the individuals that I met was a track athlete, and he was talking about his training protocol in that, he would run sprints, part of his practice. And as soon as he hit a great sprint, he'd stop practice. It didn't matter if he had another hour to go, he would stop, because success breeds success. And he didn't want to go past that point of burning himself out, which was a pretty interesting concept. And then the late Charlie Francis was a track and field coach out of Canada. He was Ben Johnson's track coach. He did the same thing. I mean, he would watch his athletes, and they had a great run. He'd be like, all right, you're done. Because there's this minimum effective dosage. And again, to this whole idea of, success breeds success, don't, scream yourself into the ground where, okay, you're absolutely destroyed. Okay, well, tomorrow will be a better day. You got to be the best version of yourself every single day. Every day is going to be different. But the idea is to get the most bang for your buck out of that day, but then not overload yourself. And I think that's an internal conversation you need to have, but that's also a conversation that needs to be understood amongst the coaches and the rest of the players too.
Do you have any tips for people that's because previously you sort of mentioned how you can sort of you would want to structure or structure your day to have the best effect on your training and performance and so on and so forth. And do you like that? That's when you were talking about it, it sounded like quite regimented, which for an athlete it would be. I mean, it's your profession, and you're going to have coaches and people like guiding you through it. It's gonna work out. But if you're, let's say, an amateur who doesn't have access to those resources, sure, and you want to, or you're people like us, where we're just obsessed with how can we get there. What do you think would be the best tips for someone that would struggle with something that seems quite restrictive in that way? Because some people do not do well with a restrictive kind of regimented type of system. Yeah. So how can you still? Is there anything?
That's a great question. So I think creating a framework is key. And so while frameworks can be structured, it allows you the freedom to move within.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like you want to have an overall framework that you can operate within, but give yourself the freedom to say, okay, I'm going to do a little bit more today, or I'll do a little bit less.
So you have some rules basically.
Yes, so you create some boundaries or some rules.
Yeah.
And I'm not a big fan of rules. I think rules are just suggestions, right? It's all, everything's a suggestion. But
that's true.
Everything's just a suggestion.
Yeah.
And so really it's like, okay, so for instance, let's say you have 3 days a week to practice. Okay. One of those days will be on the weekend, so you have a little bit longer. So let's say you have, if you want to do a long day on the weekend, so you have 8 hours, and then maybe you have, 2 smaller sessions in the middle of the week, 2 to 4 hours, or maybe even just 1 hour. It doesn't matter. What I would do, or what I would say is, okay, well, what is the total amount of practice time you have per week? What are the number of days that you can allocate to those practice times? And then what makes sense with your schedule, with your work schedule, school schedule, to figure out what block of training makes sense. And then when you do that, you then take a look at, okay, well, what else is going on within that day? Is like Monday going to be like a class day where I'm in class for 5 hours and I have work and I only have an hour to practice? Well, that may not be the best day to have a very intense practice day. So maybe what you're doing is you're going through and it's just technical stuff, or tactical, really. You're just kind of going through, you're just looking at different set pieces, you're just working through the maps. You kind of pick a derivative of, this high, the most, what's the word I'm looking for? Like the most ideal day, okay? But you just do a small component of that. So you do a piece of this ideal day within that 1 hour block. And let's say maybe Wednesday you have 3 hours and it's a less stressful day. Well, maybe you allocate more time to really get down in the weeds of what you need to accomplish. And then what you can do on that Saturday or Sunday where you have, let's say 6 hours, you can put it all together. Does that kind of make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah. It's so you, like you say, you have the framework, and so
correct.
You can create options with your day so that you don't have to do X by Y, but in the day your goal is to achieve this.
Exactly. It's having daily goals. Like what I would encourage too is when you sit down to practice, say, okay, what is the one thing that I need to accomplish today to make this practice a success? And not like 5 things, like one thing. What is the one thing that I really need to practice that I know will make me a better player? And just focus on that. Like I've even talked to guys, it's like, hey, you have a whole slew of weapons. Maybe like one day you just focus on the sniper. Like let's say your sniper game's off. So maybe you just take your sniper and you just focus on that, and that's the only gun you use in the entire game, and that's what you focus on.
Yeah.
And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah, why not? Like, why wouldn't you? I mean, some people do that, and it's just a matter of, again, kind of giving yourself the freedom. And on the flip side, it's like, hey, let's say you have that 1 hour and you just want to get a hard game in because like the next day you're just going to have off and you're just going to rest, like go at it, man. So again, it's having that framework and just knowing that it doesn't all have to be accomplished within that one day.
Yeah.
It's about the dosage, right? It's how you spread it out over the week.
It's really interesting as well from like an emotional perspective. I actually just realized I've only got 17 minutes left so I quickly want to get this point out before moving forwards. It's kind of a big area, but the emotional, like you can set yourself up to fail sometimes emotionally.
Sure.
So that's always been an interesting one for me. For example, people like in poker, for example, let's say people chase their losses sometimes, and I think that can happen too within practice. Like if you have, let's say, a day of practice and you end on a bad note, last couple hours, maybe you lost a couple games, even though it's maybe unimportant ultimately, you're still doing the work you're supposed to do. You feel emotionally pretty bad because you're emotionally tied into the game because it's all you do most of the time. I mean, it does go back to your point about life balance, which will make those losses a little less bad. But how, like, do you have any tricks in keeping yourself honest and not sort of leading yourself down more of a path of rationalizing things and playing that extra game when maybe you shouldn't, and so on and so forth?
Oh man, that's a great question. This kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier about journaling, and again, identifying like what's the one thing for that practice day.
Right.
Because if you can accomplish that, and even if you don't, if you work towards that goal, then that's a win.
So it's framing it as a win by understanding what you're doing in the long term.
It's a process.
Yeah, it's not
Brother,
day by
it is
day,
a process. It's just like anything else, right? Like you are not going to build Rome in one day. It's a process. And so I think by having a roadmap, again, to understand that, hey, this is where I want to end up, and this is the behaviors, and this is what needs to happen along that way. I use the best self journal, which is kind of how I compartmentalize and unpack rather my day and how I track it over time. And using those principles is fantastic. I mean, you map out your schedule for that day, in the morning and nighttime gratitude, which is huge just for emotional wellness. And also, I don't think people take time to really think. I mean, today's Thanksgiving, I'm grateful for friends and family out there. Thank you. But it's also, people don't really take the time to be grateful for, man, like life's awesome, and you need to have that viewpoint. It's a conditioned viewpoint to see it that way. But also, listing out maybe 3 objectives that you need to accomplish that day, but what is the one big goal that you want to accomplish? And then what are the derivatives of that goal? And then lessons learned, big wins, and that's it. And you track that over time. And so I think, being able to disassociate that from just the daily grind, I think people just kind of fall into this groove of like, you just got to grind, and that's how they get sucked in. Yeah,
it's the dumb practice versus the intelligent practice.
Yeah, there's a great book called Practice Perfect, or Perfect Practice, I believe. I'm blanking on the author's name. It's a fantastic book. But I mean, it's used in education systems. But you can apply that to any sort of practice. It's actually phenomenal. I encourage people to read it.
Awesome. Right. Last couple questions.
Yeah.
So what is the okay, I'm trying to think. What was you were saying again? It's complex, but it doesn't have to be complicated.
Correct.
Right. So what is a simple way that, let's say, your average Joe at home who wants to improve and better their performance, what is like the 1 or 2 things that they should do that doesn't cost anything, that's easy, that you think is like right at the top priority?
Yeah. Okay, so first one is take care of your body. Take care of your body and your mind. So sleep. Really work on better sleep habits, and aim for 7 to 9 hours of sleep, and drink water. That's like from the nutrition side. That's very, very simple. You can add a pinch of sea salt to your water so you get some sodium and electrolytes so you retain the water, put a little bit of lemon, and you're good to go, balance out the pH. From a technical, tactical side and just understanding practice itself, I think journaling and keeping track of each day is really beneficial. and being able to look back on your notes and saying, okay, what did I do well? What did I do wrong?
Scary.
What's that?
It also could be scary.
It can be, but that's how you learn, man.
Yeah,
And it's like, you can't just like, okay, I'm not thinking about it again. But then if it keeps happening, well, then you should probably do something about it. I think those are the two biggest things. I would start with that. I mean, again, it's like I'm a firm believer in major in the majors. It does not have to happen all at once. You need to create a strong foundation, then build consistency over time. It's about having habits and then turn into lifestyle changes. And that doesn't apply just to overall life. That's also applying to your in-game mechanics and your performance as well.
Okay. Best bang for buck supplements.
Oh man. So I would say, like a Super Greens, powder.
And why would that be?
Because I think a lot of people don't eat enough fruits and veggies.
Yeah, okay.
It's not that I think. I mean, I know that a majority of people, I eat a ton of fruits and veggies, but I still will do a scoop just because there's some other great, vitamins and minerals that I'm not getting in different fruits that I can get out of that.
And the powdered form is not a gimmick. It's although it's a powder, it's good. It's good.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. I mean, some are better than others. Athletic Greens is great. There's another one. I'm blanking on the name. I'll give you your show notes. But yeah, I think that's great. Vitamin D is huge, especially for gamers who are inside, right? Vitamin D, get that in. And magnesium. Those are like the two big vitamins I always recommend. I mean, magnesium is great for cellular function, nerve function, cognitive performance. And vitamin D is just going to help with overall bone density and just helps with a ton of other enzymatic properties as well.
Awesome. Okay. And finally, you've already mentioned some resources, books and whatnot. What is a great resource you can think of right now that you think people would benefit greatly from reading?
Yeah, you could check out my Twitter.
Nice. I'm getting to that afterwards.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is there's a lot of information out there, and what we're trying to do with our Twitter is like take that information and make it really accessible and applicable to gaming. But it's Precision Nutrition does a really good job. They're a Toronto-based company. That's actually who I have my nutrition certifications through. They do a great job of their nutritional information and just like lifestyle and habits. That's great. That's the only one that's really coming to mind.
Awesome.
From the nutrition side. And we try to do a good job of hitting all fronts on our Twitter.
Cool. Okay, so give me the details. Twitter, your personal one. And just everything.
So, disclaimer, I'm not great with Twitter personally, so I'm slowly getting on the Twitter game, right, on the Twitter machine. So mine is at Coach T_Johnson, and our Innovative Performance Institute is at Inside IPI.
And so the kinds of stuff that you just mentioned so you mentioned with the company, like what you would be tweeting, but with regards to your personal Twitter, what kind of stuff do you tend
That's
to...
a great point, man. I'm still trying to figure that out, because I hadn't really been real big on the Twitter game before. I'm a pretty private person, So now it's like, okay, well, what do I want? What am I really trying to put out there? So it's going to be more of my own personal training, but just kind of like daily thoughts and just kind of like knowledge that I'm trying to share with people and really kind of share this experience of going now from traditional sports into esports and what that path looks like and the conversations. And that'll kind of tie into this podcast I want to create as well, where it's going to bridge the gap between traditional sports and esports.
That's amazing. Well, Taylor, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, brother.
I'll probably try to steal more of it because there's so many things as we're going through. I'm
Let's
like,
keep it, man. Of course.
So yeah, thank you so much. It's been amazing.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Awesome.
Yeah, man.
Cool.